Hi, everybody. This is Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. And tonight, my guest is Robyn Hood, and I'm so excited because I haven't talked to Robyn. It's been ages, Robyn, since we've talked.
It has.
And I miss our conversations. They're always so much fun, and we have a great time. So I'm just going to make you big, and I'm going to be down in the little corner there. Woo! Okay.
Okay.
And I can always bring me back if you're like want somebody in there, but I can ask you questions. So anyway, if people want to ask questions, please put them in the chat and I'll keep track of the chat. And tonight our topic is what you can do every day. Is that right, Robyn? Like things you can do?
Yeah, I think that's what we decided to talk about. And actually really how being mindful of how everyday things that we do influence what happens with our horses. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, that and I remember years ago, people do all kinds of body work with their horses, but then they work with them in a way that sort of negates a lot of what they do. And so I think there's many things that we can pay attention to.
Awesome. All right. So Robyn, just in case somebody is going to watch this video later and doesn't know who you are, do you want to just do a brief little intro? Great. Thanks.
So as Wendy said, my name's Robyn Hood. I am not an outlaw, but it was my sister is Linda Tellington-Jones, and she is actually the one who named me. She, I was the second last born. She was the oldest of six, and she came home and she said, our family name was Hood, and she said, you have to name this one Robyn. So there we go. And a little known fact, my mother's name was Marion, so we had Maid Marion, and I have a brother named John. So, and then when I was a child, I used to show jump different people's horses, and one was called Farrier and one was called Little John. And so you can imagine, here comes Robyn Hood riding Farrier. So that was kind of amusing. So I've had an opportunity. I've been around horses since before I could walk. And Linda used to throw me up on a horse when I was about, 2.5 and slap their butt so it would canter in to the barn. And my mother would have slightly a fit. But I had an opportunity much of my life to work with Linda. When I was younger, I'd go in the summers to her riding school. And I've had Icelandic horses since 1986, and I had 200 at one time, but now it's much more manageable. We only have about 30 horses here, so it's pretty easy. Yeah, so I teach the Tellington method in lots of different places for dogs and horses, and just wants to help people understand their horses better. And I think most people want to have a good relationship with their horse, and so that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, and that's the thing is, I've yet to meet somebody that says, I want to have a bad relationship with my horse.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That's not what we go into this for or why we're doing this. No. But bad relationships happen, just like they happen with people, they can happen with horses. So, what are some of the things that you see that wind up causing a bad relationship?
That is a really good question. Well, I think that one thing that happens is it's bad enough that we can't communicate when we speak the same language. And then we add a totally different species. Because I know, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Wendy, that you're in another country and you don't really understand the language, and you hear them in a certain tone and so on, and you're like, whoa, what's going on? You don't know. And so I feel like this lack of understanding, I feel like taking things personally from horses is one thing that makes a huge difference. Not listening to horses because we're taught not to. We're taught to just get after them and make them do it. I think that's is one of the things. So if we can at least, understanding the behavior doesn't say, oh, the horse is going to walk over me or do whatever. It's just that if we don't take it personally and we go, okay, what can I change in what I'm doing to make a difference? Because the only thing in this world we have the potential to control is ourselves. And so if something isn't working, change something you're doing. And I think there can be so many things that can be difficult for a relationship. As an example, some years ago we had a young girl Mandy was asked to go and look at this horse because the horse had really bad behavior, and it was at a stable that really believed that you just got after them to make them do what you want. So yeah, the mare was, biting when she was being girthed, and she was really, miserable and not okay to ride, explosive and so on. And it was a pretty green rider. She brought her to us after a while, but we had her get a holistic vet. The horse had really bad ulcers, and that was the number one thing. And so when they treated what was going on for the horse, it completely changed it. But if we have this attitude that our horse is whatever, stubborn, resistant, dominant, whatever it is, we carry that through in how we treat them. And so one of the sort of tenets of the whole method is change your mind, change your horse. And if we can change our mind and how we see things, that makes a tremendous difference.
Excuse me. But, taking it personally, I can't tell you how many people think that the horses, they take it personally, and then they feel like they're doing a bad job with other people around. In other words, they feel like my horse is misbehaving and I should be able to do something, and I'm not doing the right job, or I'm not capable, or I don't know how, I think is a lot of it. They don't know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It can make a huge difference.
And it's a tough one, because once you take it personally, you think the horse is intentionally doing this. It's so, I just remember, I'm going to tell you a little story, because when I first met Linda Tellington-Jones, it was 1985. It was a year after my wreck, and it was at Ellie Jensen's. And I remember her looking at this really problem horse, and she would go, "Isn't that interesting?" We all know that saying, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
That interesting? Right. But it got you out of the mindset of thinking it's a problem and wrong, into thinking, into investigation, into curiosity, into like what's going on, not you got to do something about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really starts with, part of it is, people get told they're just not tough enough. That's a really common thing. I remember some stories you told me about seeing people, and they made comments when I'd ask them a question. And it's, each of us can only do what we feel comfortable with. And if we don't feel comfortable with something, our horse knows it. Someone else, we know that there are lots of methods that work with horses, lots and lots of methods that work, or they wouldn't be done.
It wouldn't exist. Yeah.
Exactly. It's just that you have to find something that works for you, that makes you feel okay, is seeing the whatever the animal is as a sentient being, instead of just a motorcycle or something that has to be the same every day. I find it so amusing. Here we are as humans, and we may be quite skilled at something, but we can't necessarily do it exactly the same every day on command. And yet we expect that the horse every day is going to be exactly the same. Nothing is going to change about, it doesn't matter what happens in the context, is that they should be able to do it. And it's so absurd, actually, when you actually think about it. Could they have had a bad day? Could they be a little bit sore? Could they have just slept badly? Could their, friends in the pasture kick them? We just don't know. And so if we just cut them a little slack, it really makes a big difference. And, we can all get in. If you haven't been in a situation that you feel a bit stupid, or you feel like, that you're not good enough and so on, you probably haven't done enough things. I remember being, I took part in a competition called Battle of the Breeds, and we had an Icelandic in it. And for the previous 3 years, Christine, who had worked for me, had a really great horse who did everything. We decided to change horses. So here I am, such a dummy. I took a very nice, easygoing Icelandic. We taught him to drive really easily. He could do trail. He could do English and Western. He wasn't so good at jumping, but they can't be good at everything. But he was really, okay, totally easy to drive. So we get to this event, and there were a few things that, I had failed to do with his horse. And one of them was he'd never been in an indoor arena. So not only were we in an indoor arena, we were in a coliseum. And coliseum, so here, there's noise. They're so noisy. And what happened when we were driving is he was totally okay in the driving part. It was obstacle driving kind of thing. So one at a time, you went in, you did your thing, but then we had to come and line up. And he just freaked out. He really panicked, and he didn't know what to do. And I'm thinking, like, first of all, I'm thinking, what's wrong? But then I'm feeling, why are you doing this? Because I felt really stupid. And then I realized that what was happening is the noise from this Coliseum. First of all, when he was in there and moving, it's easy to do stuff when you're moving if you're not so sure. Standing in the middle, all the noise of the Coliseum comes like this, crashing down on top of you. And so so stand there does not feel at all safe. But the point is that all of us, no matter what and how empathetic we want to be and so on and understanding, we can all have those times when we feel the pressure of, you know, a huge audience or just a few people, or, you know, somebody who is, you know, saying, oh, you should be able to do this or not. So, you know, I get it when other people are around, you know, we've kind of all been there. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, recently I was working with a young horse that came to a trainer, and she was supposed to ride him. We brought him into the indoor, and the first day she brought him in, he totally panicked, right? But then the owner, you know, like I worked with him a few days with the labyrinth and stuff, and then the owner came, and the horse had been walk, trot, and cantering with 30 days under him, and she got on because it was the owner, and, you know, that's what she'd been doing and expected to do after I'd done groundwork and stuff. And he wouldn't turn left. He couldn't turn left. And like, we didn't get after him, but it turns out there was a wall of mirrors, and he wouldn't turn away from the mirrors. And we didn't figure that out until the trainer figured it out a couple of days later. She's like, wait a second, it's the mirrors. And there was, you know, and the problem was there was nothing to really indicate to us that he would only turn right into the mirrors and turn left away from the mirrors. You know, but it was just having to stay open. And, you know, we didn't get after the horse. We're just trying to figure out what, you know, is he in pain? That was a huge, you know, one of the question marks is, and I think that people are taught to think that horses don't have pain.
Yeah. And it's you know, that it's or some reason for doing something, like something. And the thing that I have really learned over the years is that sure, there'll be times when you'll work with a horse and you've done all these things and you think, maybe this is just one who he just doesn't want to cooperate. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, for whatever reason. And I have to tell you that every time that I've had that, hasn't been that frequent, but every time, ultimately, I found there was such a good reason, that it was a miracle that the horse could actually do what they could do. And one was a horse, well, you know, the Gelbarts. It was a horse of the Gelbarts, who was, they used to get a lot of horses that had lots of issues with, you know, maybe they would broken down. They'd been bought for a lot of money and then broken down. And so they would take these horses and rehab them. And they had a horse that would jump at home really well, but a few cent fences at a time and so on. But a show, it wouldn't even go in the ring. And so they ended up donating the horse to the university to have a necropsy. And it turned out that the horse actually had just a hairline fracture and a splint bone. So every time he must have landed over a fence, it must have been so painful. And so one or two jumps, you know, he could deal with it. But the thought of going in and having to work, you know, consistently. And of course, you know, these sort of top clinicians had said, well, just beat this horse up because he's just getting away with something. Yeah. And I just feel like we have to look beyond the behavior. Behavior is a form of communication. And especially if the behavior's new. You know, we all know these stories of loading horses in trailers. I remember Ellie Jensen, her horse always loaded in a really nice trailer. One day the horse wouldn't load, and they finally got the horse on, just finally got it on, drove 20 feet, and the trailer fell off the hitch. So the horse, when he went to step into the trailer, knew it felt different. Yep. And didn't feel safe. So he wasn't going to go in. It finally went in. And I've had several trailering incidents like that were the horse always loaded and then suddenly didn't. And there was a reason that had to do usually with the trailer, the springs, the floor, something like that. So we don't give them enough credit for sensing their environment. No, we don't. We don't. We also don't. You know, I was told you I was talking to Bettina yesterday,
And she did some studies at Michigan State University on the force plates. And she was at a complete halt, and she could feel Mimi shifting her weight from foot to foot, standing perfectly still. And I think, this is where Surefoot comes in, is that we don't realize how much they're actually shifting their weight when they appear to be still. Not actually still. And that, it was just really fascinating. They have that research. I haven't seen it, but I know it exists.
That's super interesting. It's super interesting. Well, at one of the conference that we had to take online in October, the Stephanie Cote is a vet in Ontario, and before she went into vet school, she spent a year with me because she had come to a clinic and she realized that she didn't want to go into vet school without the skills of handling that she had learned from us. And, this is 25 years ago. So she took a year off and she did it. And then she did a trailering study for one of her behavior courses, where she took 10 horses that were slow loaders. They had to load in less than, I don't remember how many minutes it was. She did a research paper on it. And then she did 6 sessions she took pulse and respiration. She did cortisol levels, which 25 years ago, people didn't really consider cortisol. She did 6 30 to 45 minute sessions with them, nothing to do with the trailer. She did a little bit of the leading work, just of the groundwork that we did, the labyrinth and so on. A couple of sessions of bits of body work. She did a riding session with them. She mostly with the neck ring. And in between, they were not allowed to do anything, to do any practice with it at all. And then they retested the horses. And 9 out of 10 of them loaded significantly more quickly than they had to start. It was significant. The 10th horse, you didn't have time to retest, so it was a negative. But the most interesting thing was, what she noticed is that the horses that were slow loaders, their pulse and respiration went up when they saw the trailer. Went up to the level that it was in when they actually got in. Wow. And the horses that when they got in stood completely still had higher levels of cortisol than the horses that got in and actually moved a little bit, just not scrambling or anything, but because I do see these horses, they get in there and they're jam themselves. I've seen horses that would colic on a long trip because they didn't move. Yeah. So it was really interesting. So I think there's just so many things that we don't know physiologically that are going on and we can't, it's not anyone's fault, but that's why it's interesting, just some of the research, like what you were saying about Bettina.
Well, and there's other research coming out. I'm going to have Sharon and Laura Wilsing on, and I know they've been working with HeartMath.
Oh, yeah.
And so that will be interesting because that's very telling, and for anybody who doesn't know what HeartMath is, it's there's a biofeedback unit that you can get that can tell you when you're in what's called coherence, meaning
heart coherence,
your heart is regulating your brain rather than your brain being stressy and trying to regulate your heart. So we're finally getting to the point where we can get more research, and I think that's going to open a lot of doors because people are realizing we've got to do something. Well, at least in certain circles, they're realizing we've got. It's not in all the circles, but it's coming to a head. And if we don't start changing, not only in the way we handle them, but in the way we have bred them, because I think, Sharon May Davis's work shows us that we've kind of gone down a difficult path with breeding. And so then you actually have to wonder, is the breeding and the behavior in many ways, how much of it's going hand in hand.
Well, and then there's also this thing called cellular memory that is actually, they know that it gets passed on. It's just like trauma is passed on. You can have animals that didn't, if their parents sort of took it on or were exposed to things, it can come up in the offspring. Certainly they've proven that well with people, and it has to be the same. It has to be the same, but it's interesting. Well, I think you must have been at Bitterroot in the early 80s when we did the work with Anna Wise and with basically what HeartMath is doing into heart coherence, is registering the biofeedback. And
I wasn't with her, but I was there, and I remember, like we would do a circle with the horses in the middle of the circle, and just how fascinating that was.
Yeah. Well, and that, so she hooked the horses up to look at the brainwave patterns. And really the whole thing about like the EMS machine is that it helps you know if you're in heart coherence, and so you can regulate your breathing and so on. What the biofeedback, can't remember the name of what the system's called, but it would regulate or register beta, alpha, delta, and theta, and to see where they were. And that's when we found out with this one of the horses is that when they were going around the corners of the labyrinth, it activated the beta brainwaves. And so it was really interesting. And they did it another time at one of the zoos just to get some feedback about kind of what was going on. So it is, what does it mean? I don't know, but it's interesting to to just be aware of it, I think, is one of the things. And certainly Sharon McDavies. Well, that was another horse. I was just in Australia, and this person she had a really nice, tried to be cooperative kind of horse, and she couldn't, he just couldn't do a lot of things, but she was just told she wasn't tough enough. And she went to a lot of holistic vets. And one of them finally said, there's something wrong. I know there's something wrong, but I don't know that we can fix it. And it is often the case. There isn't something that you can do to make the horse be what you need the horse to be, or you want the horse to be. So when they did the necropsy, they found out, this horse had organs in the wrong place. This horse had heart enlarged. This horse had so many things. There were a few things that Sharon had only ever seen once before.
Oh, wow.
And yet this horse works for compliance. And that was the one thing that they noticed about the horses that were the most compliant had highest cortisol levels.
Wow.
So it's kind of interesting when you consider obviously compliance horses are easier for us.
Yeah, but
what does that do to them in the long run? And what does that where is the limitation that happens for those horses?
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting.
So I'm curious. Do you remember what was one of the most difficult horses that you ever had, and then you discovered what was going on?
Well. Oh, if I could even think of it. Well, this summer we had a horse that was the hardest part about this horse was he was sort of okay and then really not okay, and sort of okay and really not okay. 6-year-old Welsh Cob, thoroughbred cross, had been homebred, raised, started in a very reasonable way. A woman went and tried him. He was absolutely great. Brought him home. Was okay until he wasn't, and then he got a little bit settled in one place. She took him for to her cabin somewhere with her other horse. The horse freaked out. She said he was absolutely dangerous. She couldn't even handle him, not let alone ride. She is super retired vet, but super experienced. And so he came here, and he was kind of off and on. And then she was taking him home every night, and it was the first day he loaded, and then he didn't load, then he was slow to load. So we did lots of different kinds of things with them. Well, one of the first things that Mandy said to him is, so have you treated him for ulcers? And it hadn't even occurred to her to do that. And he could be really difficult, not danger. I didn't think it was dangerously difficult, but really it was really hard for him to cooperate. And she took him home, and she treated him for ulcers, and it was like a flip switch. So I think that when you move a horse to a new place, and especially, she saw this behavior that it wasn't bad behavior. There was an absolute reason for it. And there's been so many cases. I was thinking about the horse that, I don't know that you were there, but in 1999, Rhino Klimka did his last big, he used to do these big clinics at the LA Equestrian Center. There'd be 12 riders, 2 horses each from training level through Grand Prix. And we all went there to work out with some of the horses. And Linda did a demo the night before he started. I'll tell you, he was amazingly gracious human being. And one of the horses that she worked with was a horse that had lost his piaffe. And he'd been like California Horse of the Year in dressage at one point and so on. And the thing that they pointed out about him that was they didn't even consider was an issue was that he had to have a general anesthetic to have his sheath cleaned.
Oh.
Yeah. And you couldn't, when Linda was working with him, she took the wand and stroked kind of under the belly to start with, and he was quite concerned about that. And he would also, they had to be really careful when they put boots on him because he would just kick and kick. And if they groomed him, he was not very cooperative. He was, would move around and so on. I mean, of course, if he really wanted to kick them, he would have kicked them. Right. He was just trying to say, stay away, be careful. And so I worked with him in between the lessons. And the first time I worked with him, I just started, because I noticed how sensitive he was to being even touched with the wand under his belly. So I took the back of my hand and I went like really slowly. And I just paused whenever his ear changed or his eye changed. And it didn't take me very long, but I was back around his sheath area. And I have to say, never met a horse that had his sheath had crud, hard scabs like this thick. It's like, how could you pee off? How, if you think about that, how could you bring your little hind legs up in such an easy, such a precise manner? Anyway, so I was able to, in a really short period of time, have him just stand with his head down. He was loose in the stall, and I was able to I could do touch all around his sheath, which he actually really seemed to appreciate because it must have felt terrible. Anyway, put some Excalibur up. There was no place to get really warm water, and there's no way to clean a sheath like that when it's like that because it's like scabs. However, when I had people walk by and go, "Oh, did you tranquilize him?" Because he honestly looked tranquilized. But he was the first horse that taught me about listening to the whispers. And I realized that if you listen to their whispers, they don't have to shout. And so often we force animals to shout at us because we don't listen because we don't listen to anything that we can manage in a way, if we think about that. And but by the third day he had piaffe again, and it's so different. The feeling, even the outside of the sheath, everything was everything had started to soften. So he was there was such a good reason. However, and I have to say that if that had been my horse, I would have gotten a holistic vet. There was some homeopathic, there was something systemically not right with him. The fact that he would create, that
much crud. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So anyway, he was a horse that just taught me a lot because, and it doesn't mean that you have to always go so slowly but if you do to start with and you pay attention, because grooming is one of those things that I think is, I think can make all the difference in the world of a horse's performance. I think if there was actually one thing, and I mean, I went through Pony Club. I think you probably were part of Pony Club at some point. Were you?
I taught Pony Club.
I went through Pony Club. I taught Pony Club and so on. And, we're taught, get that horse clean. That's the most important thing, right? Whatever it takes. And if some horses are so sensitive to grooming, and if we're grooming them in a way that is irritating to the nervous system, they're going to live in so much tension. And so we put horses in cross ties because that makes it easier for us. And someone sent me a video once, and they said they had a problem under saddle. And I said, send me a video of your horse grooming. And she has the horse in cross ties. Horse is very polite, just moving back and forth, hindquarters, just back and forth and back and forth and back. And then she goes, my problem is with riding. I know.
Yeah, no.
It hurts a lot before that. And but people don't recognize it. They don't.
It's so. I watch people talk up, and it kind of makes me a little crazy. Because you have to pick your battles, right? You have to know when you can come in and give somebody other information, and when you got to keep your mouth shut. Because if you alienate them, you can't help the horse at all, right?
Totally. Totally.
But watching how horses behave being tacked up is like terrifying, actually.
Oh yeah.
To see how many horses are trying to tell you that something is unpleasant or doesn't feel good, and it's people just. Do people not listen to themselves as much as they don't listen to their horses?
And I honestly think that, when you're super experienced around horses and you know how to kind of work around some issues, you can get away with a lot, but the horse isn't okay. But I think horses give up at some point in actually talking to us. If someone is, I don't even, treats them in a certain way that they feel like they have absolutely no choice. And they can look at someone else and think they could do it. But isn't that true for all of us? I would often say to people I'm working with is it's really easy, like particularly with dogs. Any of us could look at any of us and say, oh, if they only did ABC, we could do the same with horses. But when it's ourselves, we've kind of learned we're such a habit of how we do things. And so we forget, I think, sometimes. I think it's
so unconscious.
It is totally unconscious. Well, I had somebody at a course ask me if they, if TTouch made the horses bite. And I said, well, not usually. What happened? She said, well, I was grooming him and he's like turned around to bite me. And I said, well, where do you normally groom? And she said, oh, in cross ties. And I said, well, when he's in cross ties, he doesn't have any option to actually even let you know that something isn't okay in a way that's, some horses do, but for lots of horses, they actually don't. So that was interesting. And then I was telling you a little bit before we started it, we've been doing, my daughter Mandy has been kind of doing some podcasts with Linda to go over this kind of, it's been 50 years in 2025 since Linda kind of started this idea of a concept of, could we work with horses in a way that would help them be able to learn better, that they could really understand more what we wanted, and so on and so forth. So I grew up in Edmonton, and Mark Laskin, who used to be on the Canadian Olympic team, I think he was the coach for a while now too. And he had a horse called Damuraz who did really well. And one year at the World Championships, the horse just lost it. Started like running through fences, not wanting to jump, was just really difficult. And he took the horse to the Delaware Equine Center, and they looked him over. And remember, this is like early 80s. And they said, well, he must be arthritic. Like he's got, arthritis. And so this is why the behavior happened. So Linda was in Edmonton with us, and Mark lived there at the time when he wasn't traveling. And so we went out to look at the horse and found that he was just so touch sensitive, like incredibly touch sensitive. So you think about that, then we stick a saddle on and we do up the girth, and sometimes we really do up the girth. And then, so we've really blocked all that, kind of feeling. And then we get on and kind of warm up out of it. Well, it turns out that when we kind of questioned Mark a little bit about the horse, and it turns out that when it started, his behavior change was when they changed grooms. And the groom that he'd had when he was doing well knew that he was super sensitive and groomed him really, really carefully, and just used a really soft brush only. And then, of course, you get a new groom, and they groom in a way maybe they've been taught. If you see how some people are taught to groom, it's pretty aggressive with really stiff brushes to get them clean. And that's when everything changed. So what we had the groom do is something we learned from Annegret Ast. And you may have met Annegret earlier on. She used to take, she was from Austria, and she used to take horses that were insured for use. And the insurance companies would pay them off, and then she would take them and rehabilitate them. And many, many of those horses went on to be like junior dressage champions and so on. It always started with the grooming, like always. And so she would take hot towels with these horses, and wring them out really well so they weren't drippy. And she would go over the body really, really, really slowly. And she went from there to with a really soft sheepskin, and then with a really soft brush. And I always say to people, take your brush and put it on your bare arm and brush the way you brush your horse. See what it feels like. And some people prefer something stiffer, some like it softer. But anyway, so that's what we had him do. And he actually went on to be able to compete again and be back to where he had been before. So never discount the importance of not just getting your horse clean, but what that experience is like for the horse.
Yeah, that's so good, because it's so simple. It's so simple.
Totally. Yeah.
Right? And I think that sometimes people think that this has to be complicated. You've got to learn a lot of different stuff and know how to do a lot. But it really starts with that very simple observation of, what does my horse like when I groom him?
Yeah.
And where can I touch him that is pleasant to him?
Yeah.
And I think we so overlook that. I can just think of how many horses that, people are telling, oh, you can't touch their ears. And just by listening, I've got a favorite one. He's a chestnut off the track. Roy has a lot of opinions, and nobody could touch his left ear. And, you just find the place that they like. And, like, we did a whole lot of other stuff, but the owner was like, you could touch his left ear, and now everybody can. And, like those simple things that they teach us to avoid in a way. Sometimes, like don't touch my back legs, or don't touch my ear. But we need to rethink those moments.
Yeah. And chunk down the experience of, because it's not about desensitizing them to having the contact.
Please talk about that.
Yeah, and we talk about even this concept of systematic desensitization still has kind of not an understanding of the emotion that's going on with the process. And so for us, it's about comfortable acceptance. That's what rather than this concept of desensitization. And, we've all seen horses sacked out and so on. And I mean, listen, I've seen horses that had been sacked out, and they were quiet because they were in a kind of freeze. They were quiet until they weren't. Yeah. And then it was like, people will say, but they gave me no warning. And that's because, and maybe that's where the cortisol comes in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's this like, okay, here I am kind of frozen. So if you chunk things into small pieces and I mean, the ears are a funny thing. I had a horse back in the 70s that we got really inexpensively, because you had to take the bridle apart to put it on him. He was a really nice hunter. And if I'd known then what I know now, I mean, I just took the bridle apart. It wasn't a problem for me. But if I'd known then, I would have just chunked it down, and you find out where can you touch them, because there'll be some other places. Or is it because they're really tight in the pole, which is often the case. And there's so many things that you can do and they're not really complicated. And it's sort of about thinking about the horse and then doing a little bit and then stopping. It's not about doing it over and over until, they sort of put up with it. So it's, it is interesting. And it's not just horses, it's dogs too. I had somebody was asking me about a dog that was reactive to people coming into their house, as an example. And I don't think we don't necessarily see some of these behaviors in horses, because obviously they don't live in our houses. But so I started asking some questions about the dog. The dog is kind of okay outside, not in their own property, but that's usually because nobody's interacting with them. So what happens, of course, is someone comes into the house, and what does everybody want to do? They want to touch the dog, or, like, leave the dog alone. If the dog comes up to you, it doesn't mean they even want you to touch them. It's just they want to know what you're about. So as it turns out, I said, so how is the dog about contact? Oh, not very good. So how's the dog about grooming? Oh, terrible. So all of those things go together. This like set tension held in the body. It can be the same with people, right? Like how they feel will be reflected in how they act. I mean, that's one of the principles of the Feldenkrais work, right? So if their behavior is going to be a reflection on what they're feeling and, how they're responding to life. So it's fascinating. And I remember people will think that, I was thinking about this horse that you were talking about in the ear. People think about so many things that it's just the way the horse is.
Yep.
It's just the way they are. And listen, we're not, hopefully we're smart enough that we can figure out how to work around some of these things, which is what people usually do, like taking the bridle apart, right? You can figure it out, because it was better than having a fight with this horse or having to stand up on something to get the bridle on. But if we just realize that they're just trying to communicate with us, but we don't necessarily know their language.
Yeah. With the dogs, I find that such an interesting story because, traveling and teaching all the years that I've done, there's a husband typically in the house, right? You get done with the clinic and there's a husband. And the thing that I found worked best was I ignore them. I don't engage them. I just ignore them. And then pretty soon they're like, oh, you're okay. You're not one of those people that's going to talk horses at me all night long. It's like,
exactly.
Yeah, right. And then I find a topic that they like, even if I don't know anything about it or I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Right? And pretty soon they're like, it's okay that I show up. But, we think about confronting as opposed to, it's submissive is not the right word, but that just closing in a little bit, not just being out there and pushing on them, but closing in and making a space so they can come to us. And I think people do that with horses and people and dogs. They push out, even if that's not their nature, when they should just come in a little bit and make a space.
Yeah.
I found it works great for me staying at places with husbands that were like not horses.
Well, and fair enough, because I don't care how much you like horses; it can get boring talking about.
Oh, I agree. Right? And they just see another horsewoman coming in the door, and oh my God, it's
exactly. Yeah, I know exactly. It's interesting. Yeah, no, I think it is. It's that just like being more neutral. That's part. I think that's sort of part of it too. And that's the same with our animals. If we can be a little bit more neutral, so we're kind of interesting by the fact that we're not pushing ourselves on them, if you will.
Yeah, making that space. And I'd like to go back to desensitizing for a moment too, because for me that word means make it dull. And I don't want my horses to be dull.
No, nobody does. Nobody does.
So I don't understand the concept at all that you're trying to make them dull when you want them to be responsive. And so that's never worked for me.
So I know. Well, and there's sometimes people do things to horses, and sometimes they want them to stand still when they're doing that, and other times they want them to move. How is a horse supposed to know? Yeah. It's really, it's amazing how clever horses are actually in figuring some of those things out with what we do. But other areas of just everyday handling is how we pick up their feet.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up.
The number, well, you see that all the time, and putting a horse on offering a surefoot pad. I ask how many people were taught to like lean into the horse's shoulder to pick it up. It's shocking how many people were taught that. So the horse doesn't learn that you give a little signal and then you wait until they shift their weight off that foot so they can pick it up. It's actually pretty simple, because they can't pick it up if you're pushing into them. The opposition response comes in, and they have to take the weight off the other three legs. And Mandy just wrote a post on our Facebook page about behavior and so on. And we had a mare that came to us a couple of years ago. I guess now maybe a year and a half ago she came. She was 4 years old, an Icelandic mare. She'd been started. She came to us with her second set of shoes on, which we don't actually shoe any of our horses right now, but we used to shoe our horses, but not when they were first started. And we didn't start them quite like that at 4. But anyway, she came to us and her feet were really overgrown. Well, it turned out that she a really nice mare, very compliant, friendly kind of horse and so on, except when you wanted to pick up her feet. And she's base narrow, and part of it is her age. We don't really start riding them generally until they're 5. I mean, we start them maybe at 4, depending on what we get around to. But she was super narrow. So if you think about that, what do people do? Especially Icelandics are kind of small, and then there's probably a tall Farrier. They pick up the foot, pull the foot out, and she's so really out of balance. Well, it turns out they actually had to tranquilize her every time she had her shoes on, or even to have her feet trimmed.
Wow.
Which anyway, so she came to us and we had to get these shoes off, and we've had 28 foals one year, right? So we've had lots and lots of experience with getting, horses used to the farrier and so on. And so we did a lot of things. We did a little bit of clicker training to start with, but it didn't really work for her because she was quite a foodie, and that wasn't so useful. So we just went through the series that we do of like picking a foot up, putting it down, picking it up. Anyway, we got her so that we could actually get, before the farrier came, he came, the first day he came, we got the first two shoes off, front shoes off pretty easily. And we worked with her so that he could do that. And he's a really, really nice guy, really patient. So we got the one hind shoe off. But when you'd go to pick up the right hind leg, I've actually never had a horse that was like this. She didn't kick you. She just moved around so much, no matter what you did. She was just like kind of moving all over because she was so unsettled about having that foot held. Because I'm sure they'd probably been a little rough with her because they didn't know what else to do. That's what happens. So we really needed to get the shoe off. So we used some Dermosedan. We gave her like an oral sedative just to take the kind of edge off. And it's the first time in, I've had horses for nearly 70 years. and it's the first time I've ever had to use tranquilizer on a horse to do anything with their feet. And we've had a lot of horses. And so we did it once because we needed to get that shoe off. And then Mandy just continued to work with her little bits at a time. And then the first time that the farrier came, she did a lot of just little bits of leg circles, not a lot, like a little bit at a time. And then the farrier came back, and what we did is we let her eat hay while he did her feet. And so the first couple of times that she had her feet, just even had her feet trimmed. Actually, Mandy started by doing some rasping to start with, just lots of just the small bits of preparation. And so the first couple of times we let her eat some food to make it easier for her and the farrier, because that's important as well. Now she's 100% okay. So it probably took 10 lessons, but this horse had been actually difficult with her feet even since she was a foal.
Yeah.
But it was 100% about balance. And the thing is that physical, emotional, and mental balance. If you think you can't do something, you really can't do it.
Right.
And that was a huge, huge, huge part for her. So they just have so many lessons to teach us.
Yeah. And, the thing about the feet, it's so interesting because you can learn so much picking up a horse's foot. So much, right? We're not even taught to notice how they pick up their foot. So, I was up at your place and we filmed Shriner. And I later looked at that video because I was putting his foot on a pad. I couldn't see what he's doing, but he threw his whole body over the other side to give me his foot.
I know.
So and that's the thing is you can't see how the horse is accommodating that request because you're looking down. And it's
well, it's interesting with this mare because she could not stand on a surefoot pad.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me either.
She couldn't. This summer we'll probably do more with her. She's a really nice mare, but she's really totally okay with her feet now. But I certainly find that we have a few horses that are a little pretty arthritic and so on. And if we just stand them on, the physio pad or something, like even a few minutes while the farrier's doing other horses, it's so much easier for them. Just makes it so easy. But it's not, nothing's true for every horse. And that was why for her, we tried everything that we knew, because.
And those horses lead you to what you don't know. I think that's.
Yeah.
When you're, and I think it's easier when you're not emotionally involved with the horse to look for things deeper.
Totally.
And so, sometimes with it, like I said, with where we started with our own horse, it's a reflection on us or we don't know what to do, or, we get frustrated, or we're alone and we're trying to figure, and you can't see what's happening.
Or we're afraid. And
Yeah.
fear is a huge driver, whether it's fear of looking stupid, fear of losing, fear of getting hurt, fear of whatever.
No, you're right. You're right.
You're
absolutely right. And people are not, people aren't kind when they think that you should be able to. I find that fascinating. As a species, I think other animals are much kinder to each other. Not 100%, but we tend.
Well, but what I see about other animals is, we see horses in the pasture and they have a kerfuffle, but then they're friends.
Yeah.
Or they're, it's over, and they don't hold it the same way that sometimes people do. Yeah. I think that's kind of the other. And they're maybe a little bit more honest in, this isn't okay for me, but it doesn't mean it might not be okay if you did something in a slightly different, in a different way.
That brings up a really good point, that so many people think no is, if a horse says no, that they have to force them through that no. And, I find if you give them a chance to say no, and then you go, well, all right, okay, you've said no, and you don't have to scream. Can we find a yes?
Yeah. It isn't that you don't, get things done. It's just, how do you listen to them and then kind of carry on? Well, and I think that was, I always think back, sometimes the memories of like New Zealand come up, and I think about some of the horses that we worked with there. And why things are so important, like about picking up the feet as an example, is when you'd pick up a foot to, I remember one of the reining horses, and you said, oh, I bet, does this horse have trouble, turning right, left, whatever it was? And it's like, yeah, how'd you know that? Well, you can feel it. And I think that's the thing that people are not taught in general, about how much observation of the everyday things that we think that's just how they are, that A, that we can't influence them, and that B, that might not be influencing how they're behaving.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's not playing through when it is.
Yeah. So
Robyn, this is Linda's 50th year of creating team, essentially, the Tellington Touch and the so I mean, it's got to feel like, it doesn't feel like it's 50 years. I've been involved since 1985, so I've got another decade to go before.
Well, and as Linda said, and I remember going to Equitana with Linda in 79 when she was first starting. She didn't, the start of it wasn't with the body work. So our grandfather was a trainer in Russia before the revolution, and he learned from a gypsy a kind of body work on horses. And so in 1963, Linda and her first husband wrote a book called Physical Therapy for the Athletic Horse. And what's interesting in it, in this book, the gypsy, one of the things he taught them was actually to do a circular touch on the horse. Isn't that interesting?
Wow. Is that book available?
No, I should figure out a way of reprinting it on, put it on digitally, because it's so interesting, the kind of history with it. And so at first it was really, she wanted to actually help horses learn how to learn. And that was when she started in the Feldenkrais training, because she thought, well, we can improve intelligence by changing how we move. And so is that possible to do that with horses? And so the first bits of what she did was groundwork, was because before that it was mostly either you lunged your horse or you used a round pin. That was it. That there wasn't really an awful lot of thing. And even in the 60s, she used to teach a weekend workshop at Cal Poly for adult beginners who wanted to start their own horses. And she would teach them to just quietly lunge them, not chase them around, ground drive them a bit from a halter, and then, stand up on things, all the things. We'd always started horses quietly. And in fact, even before that, they used to write a column for Western Horsemen called Let's Ride. When they wrote a column that said, it's possible and it's a really good idea to start horses without bucking. This is in the 60s, and Western Horsemen dropped their column because it didn't go with the philosophy of the time. Yeah, so interesting. So anyway, it had always been that we just started this kind of step-by-step way. That's Linda's done that, yeah, since the very beginning, and so she would do these adult beginners, and people would then go home and she'd say, "Oh, look, I showed you this in a weekend, but go home and do this over a period of time. And if you do that," and then so many people were able to build a relationship with the horse. They taught the horse to stop and go and turn, and then they quietly get on and started their horses. So, so she'd always done things quietly, but what she wanted to do was figure out, could she do in a way like Tai Chi or ATMs for the horse? Could she find a way of teaching them how to use their body in a more functional way? And so that's where this inspiration in 75 came. And then when she showed Moshe, she demonstrated to Moshe what she was doing. He was amazed that she could take the principles of, something with a human and apply it to a horse. And then it was only, she only thought she could teach groundwork because it took her 4 years to learn the Feldenkrais work, and it's more like a philosophy in a way than a methodology, like that is a set sort of method. And so that's when she started in Germany. She did this. The first book that was written was she took 20 horses, because Ursula Brun said to her, "Well, Linda, it's fine that you could do this. You have tons of experience, but how can you teach this to other people?" So she took 8 amateur owners and 20 of really difficult horses that were considered either dangerous or unrideable or whatever. And she did a 6-week course with these the same people and the same horses, and it took 2 to 3 weeks with each of the horses, because they didn't do them all at the same time, but for them to become totally okay. And it was done 90% with just mindful ground, like the different elements and the labyrinth and walking over poles and under plastic, but done really quietly, like step by step. If this is too hard, we make it easier, so that the horse really started to be able to be successful and to learn that humans would actually listen to them. And that was, what the horse world can be like in terms of, making horses do things. So anyway, that was, and it was from there. She had 2 of the 20 horses that she had to do some body work on in order to help them be rideable. But the rest was all done by just this kind of mindful groundwork. And then she started to add a few different touches so she could teach people, and then on and on it's gone. And it's just been a constant learning for everybody, really.
Yeah. And, a place where I go regularly, it was baby week when I went this last time, and they brought me 4 babies of different ages. And it was like, take them through the labyrinth, put somebody on the other side, give them toys to like things to step over and pay attention. And it takes me back, because it's been a while since I've started, young horses, but it's like, here we go. And, teach them where their feet are, teach them how their body moves, and it just, I have equated it to the alphabet, that you've got to teach all the letters in the alphabet if you want to spell things like saddle. That's a complicated word.
So true. So true.
And some people want to just give the horse a couple letters and then, jump to sentences and paragraphs. And it's like, how,
well, trailer loading is a perfect example of that, isn't it? Like people go, "Oh, I want to go to a show. Did your horse load?" "Oh, no, they've never been loaded, but they'll load." Really?
Yeah. Why? Why should they?
Why should they? It's a miracle. It's a miracle. Yeah. So anyway, it's fascinating, and it's been really interesting, because I started doing the newsletter in 1982. That's actually when there had been a small newsletter done, and I did it until 2017.
Wow.
Isn't that just crazy? And so I was going through back, because of course we used to do this travels with Linda, and Linda's probably done more interesting things than anyone that I know, around the world. And but it was going through some of them that we kind of hit some of the milestones of, when she was at the, Delaware Equine Center, and how at one of the Equitanas, somebody, well, Gallo Bay, she worked with Gallo Bay, and he was always known, he was he's a famous sire from lots of jumpers, and he's always known that he bucked after fences. And that was, people thought it was funny. And
Yeah.
and he actually, they were retiring him because he became like so difficult and unmanageable. And Linda showed them what was kind of going on for this horse, why he bucked, and worked with him in a way. The vet actually asked her to work with him. And from that, they invited her to go to the one of the vet schools in France to work with horses. And, it's been Russia and France and Germany and so many places, that, because especially at the time, people didn't know. They didn't know what else you could do.
Yeah.
And I remember Carrie Ridgway was on the Great American Horse Race with us in 1976. And if you don't know, Carrie was I know you know, but Carrie was a sort of a traditional vet, and then he became a holistic vet, and he really explored a lot of different things. And we were riding, I don't know why, I was chatting with him, doing something, and he said, it used to be that a horse would come to me, they were lame, and I could say to them, well, you could just turn them out in the pasture for 6 months and then see how it goes. Or we could do, at that time, $1,000 worth of tests, and then I could tell you to turn them out in the pasture because I didn't know what else I could do, And then, of course, then he studied, acupuncture and chiropractics and all kinds of things. So he had a lot more choice. But at that time, they just didn't know. They didn't have choices about what they could do. So, Linda was a huge pioneer in so many ways, and so many things that people see as new. It's like, yeah,
I know. And it's, the thing too is that, like, I was just at AAP, and it seems like it takes so long for concepts to get more into the mainstream. I don't know. Progress has been made. Huge progress has been made, but there's so much further to go. And I find it's just, sometimes it seems like it's going to take forever, that change isn't going to happen. But then you look back, right, and you see that there has been change.
Yeah. We always used to say Linda was 20 years ahead of her time. Rear-facing trailers in the 60s. They did research on rear-facing trailers, taking pulse and respiration, and how much lower it was and easier for the horses to travel. That takes a long time to actually change. But Stephanie did. I went to Guelph, and because as a vet student, she started to study alternatives pretty early. And back 25 years ago, it wasn't as common with things, but has taught, and a lot of it does start in vet school. It starts with even handling. They're not really taught how to handle animals, certainly not dogs and cats. And thank goodness now there's the kind of force-free, Marty Bennett, I think, started one of the processes of it. And, at least it's so much more humane and safer for people as well, because, cats are nothing like an angry cat. And if you can make it, safer for the animal, more comfortable, and for the people as well, it makes a difference. So there is change, but I guess all you can do is, I say to people, it's like when you're ready, you'll find something, right?
Yeah. Okay. So if there was 3 things: grooming, picking up feet, and is there one other thing that people could be more mindful of?
Well, doing up your girth is one of the things, or your cinch. And I grew up in the time, I remember where I rode, the guy, he'd put the saddle on, do the good, knee in the belly to let them get their air out and all that kind of stuff. So doing some just slow lifts with the girth when you go to do the saddle up, if you have a horse that's sensitive to the girth, that can make a huge difference. Saddling them from the opposite side, letting them eat a little bit of hay while they're eating, so that, and of course you've got to make sure that your saddle isn't creating a huge issue.
Right.
And even if it isn't, you have to also be aware that as a rider, you can have the best fitting saddle, but if you sit like a lump of potatoes, that's not actually going to help your horse. It doesn't really matter what you do. So I would say that, but also how we lead our horses. we have this thing where we encourage people, just if you have a halter that you can lead from the side, just clip the lead line onto the side, as long as it's not like a really heavy one. And horses that are really high-headed will tend to lower their head, because as soon as we put pressure down, the reflex for many horses is to put their head up and tighten their back. And there's never a time that we want our horse's head to be up and their back dropped. I mean, we don't want that. So there's things that we can do just in how we lead them that can make a huge difference. And, that's just clipping the lead line onto the side. I've seen so many people have a huge impact.
No, I agree. I people will hand me a horse and I'll just clip the lead to the side and off I go.
Yeah. It's easy. So, but simple things, like nobody is going to do things that are, because it takes so long to change our habits. So if we can just be a little bit more mindful and pay attention to the horse. Like if you could just take a moment, that if your horse does something, like when people say, oh, my horse is really mouthy, notice when. And notice if you stop doing what you're doing, or if you're grooming and they're mouthy, suddenly move to where they weren't mouthy and see, does that stop? So I think we could learn a lot by just taking a bit of time and observation. I think it's great of, what Sharon Wilsey's doing in terms of just helping people understand more about when horses really try to give us information and we just don't necessarily know how to listen.
Yeah. Well, Robyn, it's great to see you. I thank you so much for coming on tonight. It's such a pleasure. One of these days we got to get back together again.
Yeah, we do. Well, now that all that time is over of COVID, life might get back, right?
Yeah. And, so we'll have to make a plan.
Yeah, good. Thanks a lot, Wendy. Take care.
Thanks. You too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.